Hello, and welcome back to plantcare.club, where we care about your plants. My name is Fred, and on this show, we like to do three things. Number one, we talk about your plants, indoor, outdoor, whatever you've got, we'll talk about them. Number two, we will do product reviews. So we talk about different types of soil, fertilizer. If you've got questions on like, hey, which type of soil should I get, like this bag or this bag, send us a message. We can give you a little bit of info on that, give you our opinion. And number three, we answer your questions. So if you have any questions while listening to this show, send us a message and we can answer it either over email or we will answer it on the show right here in a future episode. Check out the site too, because there's a lot of other resources on there, like blogs or videos or whatever else that can help you answer your questions. So my name is Fred. I grew up on a greenhouse farm. Now, after school, I came back to the farm, co-owner there, where we grow everything from spring annuals to garden mums and poinsettias, a lot of small filler crops in between as well. We also have a nursery in Florida where we grow indoor houseplants, palms, ferns, mandevilla. Mandevilla is the topic of today. And we send these plants across Canada and the United States. So the goal of this show is to take what we learn in the greenhouse and in the commercial growing side of things, where the professionals are really doing this as they're living, and then condense it down, put it into a format that you can apply to your own plants at home. So that's the goal here, is to take it from this end and actually apply it to your house. So, as I mentioned, we're talking about Mandevilla today. Mandevilla has a special place in my heart because this is the first crop that we ever grew on our nursery in Florida. Florida is really well known for like outdoor plants, indoor plants, as well as some of like, let's say Kimberly, Queen Ferns, Boston's, Majesty Palms, Mandevilla. A lot of Mandevilla and hibiscus are grown down there because of how warm it is. Mandevilla can take a long time to grow, but if you grow them in South Florida, it's so warm down there at all times. It's an awesome temperature. It's the right environment for them to be in order for them to grow a little bit more quickly than if you grow them anywhere else. So in South Florida, it'll take, let's say if you pot them up in October, they can be sold in May. That's kind of roughly, so like roughly 7-8 months. If you are trying to do that somewhere else, you're probably going to pot them up in June into like a 10-inch pot, and then you're going to sell them the following May. So it takes almost an entire year to do that. And that's because it's cooler. They don't get as much sunlight. The days are a lot shorter, especially as the further north you go. Like if you get all the way up to Canada, it gets a lot shorter of days. So if you are just listening, I've got 4 pictures here, and actually I'm going to make myself a little bit smaller here so you can see. Check out this one. So we've got peach, white, red, yellow. There's also pink. There are a few other varieties and colors of Mandeville. Actually, you know what? Once we get past pink, I don't know of too many more. These are the main ones. The yellow is pretty new. The yellow is they've had yellow varieties in the past, but in spring 2025, it should be the first time that the yellow there's a really good genetic makeup of yellow, so they can actually ship it and they feel confident they can say, okay, this is a good variety. We're going to send this all over the place. Up until now, they've had some sporadic yellows, like the yellow is here, and then the genetics don't really hold up, or something weird is about it, and then they scrap that one, they start over again. So anyway, the exciting part about this is hopefully spring 2025, we've got a yellow Mandevilla on a trellis that you can buy at your local garden center or retail location. Okay, so what are we going to do? First, I'm going to talk about 4 quick things that we do in the greenhouse when we're growing Mandevilla, give you the background there, and then tell you how you can apply that to your own home, and once you actually have the Mandevilla at your own place. So number 1, I've got soil. What kind of soil do Mandevilla want? At the beginning stages, I would say Mandevilla. Oh, I'm going to do my spectrum here. So on one end, you've got like sand, where you pour water into sand and it just drains right out the bottom. It doesn't hold anything. On the other end, you've got like really heavy clay or mud. And then you've got right down the middle, that's somewhere in between like mud and sand, somewhere down there. So I'm saying you're going to go a little bit closer to sand. And that's because Mandevilla roots, they can take longer to grow. Mandevilla in general are a slower growing plant. They take a little bit longer to get going and to get to the right size, but once they get going, they can take off quickly. To encourage that growth at the beginning, you want to have soil that is easy for those roots to penetrate and to get down further and further into the soil, to get down to the bottom, to seek out those nutrients. That's what you want the soil to encourage the roots to do. If the soil is really heavy, it's harder for those roots to really get through and break up the soil, get down to the bottom of it. So I'm saying you're going to want something that drains a little bit better. Another consideration is where it's grown. So if it's grown in South Florida, as you would know if you're down there, it rains pretty often, especially in the rainy season. It will rain off, rain off. Like every day, almost every day, it rains down there. If you have very heavy soil while that's happening, the soil is going to hold on to the moisture all the time. It's not draining, and so that's when you get root rot. You've got to have some lighter soil that allows the water to drain to combat that rainy season that the Mandevilla are definitely going to go through. Okay, so that is that. Fertilizer, you can go a little bit lighter on Mandevilla relative to other varieties. So, or other types of plants. So because they take longer, you're not hitting them with triple 20 all the time. You're going to use some fertilizer, you're going to push them along, but it's not like you're just shoving them right out the door like you would with, okay, a garden mum. Okay, a garden mum is on the far end of like you're really pushing that plant all the time. A Mandevilla, you're not pushing it as hard. It's going to be, you're going to continue to fertilize it. I'd say like a 28-20 is a reasonable rate to give it, but you're not doing it as often and you're not doing it as heavy of an application every single time. The EC level, the electroconductivity in that soil is going to be a bit lower than it would be for other varieties. If that doesn't make sense to you, check out our show on EC. Light. So in South Florida or in California, where these are grown outdoors, direct sunlight from day one, direct sunlight. On the other end of the spectrum, if they're in a greenhouse, they're obviously in some kind of diffused light. Usually the greenhouse gets painted, but they will take direct sunlight. And there's a small advantage here that I want to point out. So if you are buying a Mandevilla that was grown in your local region, now I'm assuming you're not in South Florida. So if you are in Ohio and you're buying a Mandevilla that was grown in Ohio or a nearby area, it was grown in a greenhouse. Your benefit is you might have less bugs. So the ones that are grown outdoors in those kind of conditions, they can be more susceptible to bugs like thrip or mealybug or spider mites, for example. But the hard part is they were definitely not grown in the direct sunlight, so sometimes they take a little bit of time to adapt to that direct light once they get outside. It won't take very long, but sometimes they can go into a little bit of a shock. The ones that are grown in South Florida or in California, they are grown direct sunlight all the time. So once they go onto your patio, they're already ready to go. They don't need any time for adjustment really. They can hit it right off the bat. Last thing, and oh great, okay, so I've got winding them as my last note here. So you can see a whole bunch, if you're listening, you won't be able to see it, but if you, I will describe it to you. So these are Mandevilla that are in a 10-inch pot. And it's kind of a sea of them. They're all over the place here. And what you see is a trellis. So if you've bought a Mandevilla in the past, it's like a wooden stake that sits in. It's usually they're about somewhere between 30 inches to 36 inches tall. They sit inside the pot, and the actual Mandevilla will wind up them. It's also, now the reason that I have it in here for the grower's notes is because the grower is going to have to send people through to actually wind them up the trellis and then stake them to that trellis. So there's a little bit of training that you have to do with these Mandevilla. As you can imagine, if you've had a Mandevilla before, they shoot out these arms. And if you don't train those arms to go to the right place, it's very easy for them to either get wound together or to the wrong trellis or to a tree or to a pole that you don't want it to. So the grower has to be on top of things to make sure that they're being wound, they're being staked to the right spot. Okay, great. We got through the grower's notes. Now, how do you apply this to your own home? First off, watering, fertilizing. What are you going to do there? Now, there's a little bit of a, a non-well-known rule of thumb. I'm going to say it's a rule of thumb that you can use. So the rule of thumb is when you are selecting a plant, if that plant if it takes a long time for that plant to grow, it's going to be a little bit easier to take care of. So, for example, a ZZ plant will take a long time to grow. But what it's doing is it's storing up a lot of nutrients, it's storing up its water, it's being much more self-sufficient in the very bottom of that ZZ plant, right where it hits the soil. And that is allowing the plant to be much more resilient. Same with a Mandevilla. Mandevilla takes longer to grow, and that means that it's going to be easier for you to take care of on the other side. On the opposite end of the spectrum, I will say, for example, a petunia. A petunia plant, a petunia hanging basket, from the time that it shows up in the greenhouse to the time that it goes out the door in the 10-inch basket, can sometimes be 8-10 weeks. It can be a very, very fast crop. So, and some growers might be looking at me saying, wow, that's a long time. It can be even faster than that. So a petunia, once it gets to the homeowner, it's going to be harder to take care of because the plant grows really fast. It takes a lot of water. It takes much more care and attention. It's much more needy. So Mandevilla falls on the other side. It takes longer to grow, but once it shows up at your home, you don't have to water it very much. So the easy way of me saying this is, yeah, you might have to water it once, twice a week. That's pretty much it. You don't have to water it really too often. Okay, next up, I've got training. So you have to train your Mandevilla just like a grower does. You're going to have to keep an eye on it. You're going to have to, if you want it to keep growing up, just give it a longer stake. Just add on something else that it can climb up. If you want it to climb like across, let's say, a railing of a deck, you can set it right beside there. Eventually, the arms are going to go up. They're going to grab onto it. You'll see them, if you ever watch them at night, the arm kind of goes up, and then it leans over to one of the sides. And I've seen this in like the slow motion videos where it'll go up, it leans over to one of the sides, and then it just starts like looping around and looping. If you're listening, well, if you're listening, it's hard to explain, but basically it's just like an arm that's swinging around and around and around, and then eventually it'll touch something, and once it touches that thing, it'll start to grab onto it, it'll wrap around that thing, and then start to climb up it. Most of the time this happens at night, and that's the plant's way of finding the sunlight, towards the sunlight, and trying to move itself forward, trying to continue on its growth. If you look at a Mandevilla in, say, like Costa Rica, where they're more native to, that's exactly what they're doing there. They're trying to grab onto another plant, like let's say a Monstera. A Monstera is climbing up the side of a coconut tree or some kind of tree there, and then you might have a Mandevilla that's grabbing onto the Monstera, and that's trying to wind its way all the way up the Monstera. So they love to try to find that light source by climbing things. If you're the homeowner, you might have to wind it a little bit. That's all. Potting. So I've got a note here for up potting your plant. If it's doing really well, you can up pot it. I know that I mentioned this for another variety. I'm trying to think of, I think it might have been Calabacoas and Million Bell. But if you're going to up pot it, I might suggest that you add on some heavier soil around the outside. So let's say you're taking a 10-inch Mandevilla, you're putting it into a 14-inch pot, or you're making like a larger planter out of it. Consider adding some heavier soil beside it that'll hold on to a little bit more nutrients if you're not in a very rainy place. This is because now that the plant's more mature, it can take on, it's looking for more nutrients maybe a little bit more often. And if you use heavier soil, it means that you have to water it a little bit less often because that soil is holding on to more nutrients and water for you. So it makes your life a little bit easier if you can add in some heavier soil on that spectrum that I've got, a little bit closer to the clay side. Okay, a frost. Believe it or not, this is pretty cool. Mandevilla can survive a little bit of a frost. Now, I'm kind of surprising, but they can. They can take a bit of a cold shock. They will adjust with the temperatures, and it's part of their genetics. Now, keep in mind This depends on the variety, it depends on the genetics, what the breeder has, yada, 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 all those things. But we have seen in some of our experiences with Mandevilla, they do last over one or two frosts. So going into October, November, you can still have it outside. You can leave it outside because it will do a decent job adjusting to that frost. Okay, next up. I've got my point here is Mandevilla and Diploidemia are not the same. So, Mandevilla is right above my head here. They're the ones that generally want to climb. They want to grab onto something, they're going to wind. A Diploidemia is more of a bush size. People use these two names interchangeably. They're in the same family. It's like two twins. Like you got a set of twins, and I'm not a twin, so I don't know this for sure. But I'm thinking like there's a set of twins, and they're very similar in a lot of ways, but they have their little differences. So Mandevilla, Diploidemia, they're very similar, but they are quite different in their habit of growing. A Diploidemia is not going to grow as tall. It's not going to keep climbing as much as a Mandevilla will. A Mandevilla is going to, right off the bat, if you plant it, as soon as the grower puts it into the pot, it's going to grow put a little bit more growth on. And as soon as it realizes, hey, I've got some roots, they're shooting, I feel comfortable, it's going to start to throw out some arms. And these arms are they're reaching up, they're doing their lasso thing, they're trying to grab onto something to climb up and continue that plant's growth. A Diploidemia is going to stay in that ball habit for a lot longer, and it's going to continue to bush out slowly, slowly, slowly. However, for a Diploidemia, eventually, once it gets to a certain size where it feels like, okay, this is about as big as I can get compared to my soil or compared to, I'm feeling really comfortable in this kind of a spot and I want some more sunlight, it will then start shooting out some arms. Now, a lot of growers will trim off those arms to make sure that it keeps that habit because that's what you're looking for in a Diploidemia. But my point on this slide is there's a difference between Mandevilla and Diploidemia. If you buy a dip and you're thinking, oh, this plant is going to climb a lot, no, that's not really what it's made for. If you're buying a 10-inch hanging basket, 12-inch hanging basket, something smaller, like the one that you see here is a 10-inch patio pot of a Diploidemia. That's mainly where they're used. Anything that is trying to achieve more height is going to be Mandevilla in general. Okay, next up, brown leaves. So this is a question, as we were putting this together, we had a question on, hey, if you're going to talk about Mandevilla, can you talk about why we've got brown leaves and what's going on? If you are interested, check out our show on how a doctor approaches a patient and then how we would approach any kind of a problem like this. I can't say right off the bat, oh, your problem is something easy. Like that's way too simple. In general, bottom leaves of Mandevilla, in my experience, will begin to drop when that plant realizes that it doesn't have, when those leaves aren't touching as much sunlight. It wants a lot of light. If it's not getting enough light down there, it's going to start to drop those bottom leaves and replace them with top leaves. So usually what I'll see is, okay, there's some bottom leaves that have dropped off. The top new growth looks great, and the plant is still winding and trying to get a lot taller. And all that means is there's a little bit of a mismatch of sunlight or fertilizer or something else. There's a mismatch of their nutrients that are available to them. So it's a defense mechanism for the plant where they're saying, I'm going to get rid of these bottom ones because they're not bringing in as much sunlight anyway, and we're going to keep focusing on the new growth at the very top. However, it could be over-fertilization. So it could be way too much that it has. It could be way too much water. It could be bugs. It could be any of these items. So I can't go into all of these different problems. Check out that other show that I have if you want to get to the bottom of why you see these brown leaves, brown or yellow. Or send us a message, send us some pictures, and in your message, try to include as much information as you can. That's going to help us go through step by step. Okay, here's exactly what we can cross off the list and what the next step should be so that we can say, okay, maybe here's where the problem is and what to what the answer is. Okay, last up, I've got, no, I'm going to make myself smaller if you're watching. So this one beside me is a 10-inch Mandevilla, and then farther over there is a 6-inch Mandevilla. My point here is that similar to other varieties like geraniums, if you are buying a 6-inch Mandevilla, that plant might not be suited to, it might not be the plant that wants to grow really, really, really big because the grower is choosing a smaller variety for a smaller pot. So be careful with this. If you say I'm going to buy a 6-inch plant and I want it to become the biggest plant in my garden, that might not work out because the variety might just be more compact, more small. If you're looking for the biggest plant, the biggest variety, usually those are in a 10-inch plant or maybe some Mandevilla landscape varieties. But this is something to be a little bit cautious about. I've had some people ask me in the past about their Mandevilla and why it's still staying so small. It's not climbing as much. Well, this could be it. Some growers will even use Diploidemia varieties in a 6-inch pot because they have that small habit. They don't have to worry about it as much. And eventually, it'll shoot out a few climbers. They wind those climbers all the way up and around the trellis, and then bingo, your plant's ready to go. So you got to be a little bit careful with that. Outside of that, that's all that I've got for today. So if you have any more questions, head over to plantcare.club. On that site, you can either send in a question, look around, check out blog posts, check out past episodes that we've done. If you really want to get into something, if you can't find your answer there, yeah, send us a message, include a picture, whatever you can do there. If you want us to talk about some other variety of plant, we're looking for some other varieties and we want to get your opinion on it too. So send us a message and say, hey, I really have, I love this lantana and I want to make sure that it looks good all spring. What do I do with it? Well, send us a message. We can do a show on that. Till next time, thanks guys. Bye.